Poetry is one of the examples of words in the English language that are extremely difficult to define. Does poetry rhyme? Well, some of it does. Does poetry have 14 lines? Well, if it rhymes and it has 14 lines, odds are you're looking at a sonnet. Does it follow a certain rhythm, a certain rhyming scheme? All of these things are elements of poetry, but they do not define poetry. One thing that poetry is very, very good at, however, is carrying a metaphor within it. And that is what we have today. If we are willing to accept that basis for a poem, not necessarily definitionally, but that basis for a poem, then we will get somewhere today. And if we don't, well, things might not be quite so fruitful. Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we are here for another poetry discussion, which will appear, of course, in two separate playlists here on the channel. Number one being the poetry discussion playlist, now over 700 videos strong, and number two being the Emily Dickinson playlist, a playlist of videos dedicated to the greatest poet of all time. You might say, hey, wait, we're talking about poems, we're talking about sonnets. Shakespeare is the greatest poet of all. You are welcome to be wrong all you would like. The poem in question today, I breathed enough to learn the trick. It reads as such: I breathed enough to learn the trick, and now, removed from air, I simulate the breath so well that one, to be quite sure the lungs are stirless, must descend among the cunning cells and touch the pantomime himself. How cool the bellows feel. If we are to accept that this is not, at the face value, a poem about breathing, we have a starting place. In this poem, however, who is the speaker in this poem? I breathed enough to learn the trick, and now removed from air, I simulate the breath so well that one, to be quite sure the lungs are stirless, must descend among the cunning cells and touch the pantomime himself. How cool the bellows feel. Our speaker seems to be coming to us from beyond the grave. Our speaker seems to be dead. This is very interesting. Why do I say dead? It's a poem about breathing, isn't it? Well, those first two words are I breathed. Well, I can say right now, I breathed earlier. But that's not where we leave the statement. I breathed enough to learn the trick. This entire statement is past tense. I breathed enough to have learned the trick. But as opposed to, it's I breathed enough to learn the trick, not I have breathed enough to learn the trick. I have breathed enough to learn the trick suggests that you are still breathing. You still practice breathing. The speaker here does not. I breathed enough to learn the trick, and now removed from air. This makes it seem like it is not temporarily removed. It is a certainty that there will not be any air. So what could we be talking about with this poem? What could the metaphor be for breathing? Well, quite frankly, I think that breathing is only the tertiary part, the spoken part, to the bigger idea which goes unspoken in this poem. It is hinted about, like we just talked about, but it is not explicitly stated. That is, that our speaker is, in fact, dead. Okay, Great. So our speaker's dead, but pretends well enough not to be that you would have to touch our speaker and able to tell that they are not dead, or that they are dead. Well, that's a strange metaphor, isn't it? I would like to introduce you to a term that I nabbed from healthline.com. What are the symptoms of smiling depression? Why are we talking about this? People with smiling depression experience formal depression symptoms, but they may have developed skills to mask or hide them in front of other people. For example, they may feel sad and hopeless, yet appear cheerful and at peace on the outside. A little bit later in the article, smiling depression is not a formal diagnosis. Instead, it's a term that some people use to describe the experience of depression where symptoms may not be as noticeable or observable. May not be as noticeable or observable. Some people may develop coping skills that involve masking or hiding some of their symptoms, such as some of these symptoms of being dead, of feeling dead, like sadness or hopelessness. Hide the symptoms like sadness or hopelessness. Mightn't perpetual sadness and hopelessness drain the life out of you? When that's the case, a mental health professional may diagnose MDD with atypical features. Now, if we go back up to this very quaint 8-line poem, substitute I breathed enough with I smiled enough, and replace the idea of death, the overarching unmentioned death, with the overarching unmentioned theme of depression. I breathed enough to learn the trick. I smiled enough. I faked enough to learn the trick. Now that line makes a whole lot more sense, doesn't it? Because there's no real trick to breathing. There's no real trick to making it look as if you're breathing. But if you're not really dead and it's not really air, then, well, there's a whole lot of room for different variables to fit in that, isn't there? I breathed enough to learn the trick. I smiled enough to make you believe. And now removed from air. And now, because I am hopeless, I simulate the breath so well. I smile so damn well that to be quite sure, that someone who sees me smiling this way, pretending nothing is wrong, can be pretty sure the lungs are stirless, that I'm just fine. They must descend among the cunning cells. They'd have to really drill down inside this conversation and touch the pantomime himself to get into that sadness, to get into that depression, to get into whatever it is, that hopelessness themselves, how cool the bellows feel, how icy this type of existence really is, how that mask that our speaker is wearing. You know, it's difficult to write poems if you're dead. Maybe, if you flip through your favorite collection of poetry, it's not quite so difficult if one is depressed, if one is hopeless, etc. You could probably recognize some names in that compilation, whatever your favorite collection of poetry is, that would be aptly described as having, perhaps, smiling depression, or at least writing depression. Thank you for being here. That is all I have for this poetry discussion. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos every single week. There's poetry every Monday, and I hope to have you back for the next one.